when we encounter kids whose parents have devoted a lot of time and energy to building confidence without competence, what we often see is two things that aren't helpful. One is kids who have an inflated sense of self, and kids who cannot receive feedback well. If the relationship doesn't serve you well, I think about how often that phrase is used. If it doesn't make you happy, then exit out. Thank goodness my wife never absorbed that message.
Yeah.
Because I've spent a lot of our marriage probably not making her happy. In fact, maybe even making her really frustrated in a lot of moments when I'm the lowest version of myself. And that her commitment, her vow to me and my vow to her was so much more deeper. In fact, it didn't even involve a vow of commit yourself to making this person happy every day. That wasn't in the vows we made to each other. It was till death do you part, like stay in the struggle, be with this person however God writes your story.
I won't lose hope in the night when the fire's growing dim. I'll just let go and I'll try. Help me walk this road and find my way back home. Find my way back home. Find my way home.
Welcome back to the Famous at Home podcast. I have a longtime friend, and many of you who've been listening to the Famous Home podcast he's been a friend to you too, because you bought his resources and Sissy's resources. But I want to welcome our dear friend, David Thomas, back to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today, my friend.
For those of you who are only listening and not watching, I'm smiling so big right now because just being in the company of this dear friend is good medicine for my soul. It is so good to be back with you. Thank you for the invitation.
I was looking forward to this so much. And since, by the way, we're going to talk about your brand new book with Sissy today called Capable. And I just want to honor you, congratulate you publicly. It hit the New York Times bestsellers list, which what a privilege. And just, I think it really speaks to who you guys are and what you're putting out into the world. I think it also speaks to the needs that parents are experiencing today.
You are incredibly kind to say that. We don't quite know how it happened. We are just in complete shock, but humbled. And to what you just said, I wholeheartedly agree. Like, I think parents are really hungry. And what excites me as I even think about the word capable, as I even think about the message of this book, is the idea that we would begin to think more deeply about how can we nurture and grow what I think God's already put inside of our kids. Like, I absolutely believe they come into this world capable and resourceful. And if we pay the right amount of attention, and we can even talk up more about what that means, the right amount of attention to that, I think we have this beautiful privilege to nurture it and steward and grow that. Or if we're not paying the right amount of attention, we can unknowingly stand in the way of that. And there are a lot of things I think we do, sometimes with the best of intentions as parents, that can get in the way of growing that capability. So I'm just grateful we get to have this conversation.
Yeah, me too. You guys have been, how long have you, so I'm just going to use you and Sissy, you guys are co-authors of the book. How long have you been practicing collectively now?
A long time. I don't even like saying the number out loud because it communicates how old I really am. We have both been practicing for over 30 years.
I love it. Oh.
We started when we were 6 and 7, though. I want to make that disclaimer.
Right. That's right.
Really young to the field.
So I want to get to let's start in the beginning. Then we'll dive deep pretty quickly. What the reason for this book, and what have you been seeing in your practices for both of you in the past few years that led to you wanting to write this particular book on this? Because there's so many topics you could be writing on. Why this one?
Well, it's another part of why I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, because I think you and I are so like-minded and like-hearted and in how we see so many things as we think about the family. And I know with a lot of certainty that I think you carry some of these exact same concerns that, what we have been seeing is this shift. And I think what we talk about in the beginning of the book feels really true always. We talk about swings and extremes, and that for us as people, not just for us as parents, but I think just as people, there is this instinct in us to do one of two things. I think about the wisdom of Scripture that talks about us. It's not a very flattering reminder that we're dogs who return to our vomit. Like, we are creatures of habit. We go back to what's familiar, even if it's not what we want. That's an instinctive move. And when we're not falling back on familiar patterns, I think we often swing to the other extreme. Like, I'm going to go the opposite direction. So if we think about that in the context of parenting, I think I sit with parents all the time who'd say to me, I am committed to not fill in the blank, yelling like my dad did, controlling like my mom did, only to find that in many moments we are, without wanting to, repeating some of those exact patterns. We find ourselves yelling in the very moments we don't want to be yelling because that was really familiar. Or, again, back to that swing, we go the opposite direction. And I think if I were to simplify it, it's much more layered than this, but we've heard from a lot of parents over a lot of years. I grew up in a home where I didn't really feel heard or seen or understood. And so the extreme swing would be, I'm going to go the opposite direction. I'm going to hear everything. I'm going to see everything. And I'm going to attend to everything. And please hear me say, as I make that declaration, like, I am such an advocate, as I know you are, for attunement and connection and seeing kids and knowing their needs. That is nothing but a good thing. But I think we can take that, like we can take all things, to an extreme. And the result of that extreme, I think, has been, back to that earlier statement, just that we have unknowingly stood in the way of building capability and resilience and resourcefulness in the kids we love. And so there's a beautiful invitation. That's the way I like to think about this book, to really think about, could I be doing that? Could I be swinging to an extreme that is equally not as helpful as that instinctive, intuitive move of what I don't want to repeat? And how can I begin to think about what I as a parent might be contributing? And do you notice I'm including myself in this? I mean,
Yeah.
Josh, a perfect example is my kids are young adults now, and one of my sons, who's 25, was home and we were having a conversation, and he's in that season of life that a lot of us probably remember being in, where he has a lot of friends getting married. He was a groomsman in 6 weddings just this spring. I mean, just traveling all over the place to celebrate friends he loves. And so, that means buying a lot of tuxedos, buying a lot of airplane tickets. And, he and I were having a conversation about it, and I found myself moving from curiosity into management. I was like, buddy, have you bought all those tickets? It gets more expensive the closer you get to the date. And as we're having this conversation, I felt myself reaching for my laptop so that I could log on to southwest.com, so that I could pull up flights, so that I could help him know the price. Like, this kid has been booking his own flights for years. He knows they get more expensive. And I still, having written a book called Capable, could find myself reaching for the laptop. So I'm including myself in this. Like, the intuitive move of, I want to fix things for him. I want to do things for him. I want to manage him. And none of that is helpful. So fast forward, he and I were together. That happened months ago, and he and I were together this past weekend, and I was asking, how have all the weddings been? We're having a great conversation. And he said to me, Dad, I didn't jump on some of those flights. I remember the conversation we had. I flew to Houston, and I think it probably cost twice as much as it would have had I booked this earlier. And all the great learning that happened for him within that experience. And that was not an invitation for me to say, I told you so. We talked about this, better. But to let this amazing kid connect the dots around that experience, be reminded that he's capable. We talk about the acronym of F.A.I.L in the book as a first attempt in learning. He's at his first attempt in learning to be an adult right now, as all kids will be in their 20s. And what the two of us know, what was certainly true of my journey, is that meant a lot of falling down and dusting myself off and getting back up and learning the hard way and making mistakes and figuring out how to remedy those. So we can rob the kids we love of a lot of learning when we're doing too much attending too much managing, too much controlling, too much doing. And I worry we've made an extreme swing in that direction and stood in the way of the capability that's really possible, that is God given, that He's put into the kids we love.
So a couple things, and I want to go back to, I'm going to talk a little bit about more of the why, or maybe how we got here. What you've seen over the last maybe 10 years, over the last 5 years, where have you seen these, where did you start to see this shift? And as one of the top, parenting, I say parenting books, it might not have just been parents, but, the last few years was Abigail Shrier writing about bad therapy. And, there's points in there that, we know more about counseling, we know more about psychology, we know more about anxiety, we know more about all these problems than we've ever known, but we're also more anxious, depressed, lonely, isolated than we've ever been, especially our kids. And I'd be curious, what's your insight into that? Have we coddled emotion too much? Have we entered in on that other extreme, even as a society, where we've not given kids, or maybe even believed that kids have the ability to be capable?
Yeah. I think we have, in many ways, stopped believing they have the capacity to be capable. And that, again, it's part of what God sowed into the kids we love. That's there. That's our great privilege to nurture and to steward and grow. But I think it starts with that question of, where could I be getting in the way? And I think the argument, one of the arguments within that book, is the opportunity for us to think about all of what we've been doing. Where has it been helpful? Where has it been harmful? And that it is deeply confusing that we have more access to support and resources than any other time in history. And yet kids are struggling.
Yeah.
There is a youth mental health crisis. I understand that the Surgeon General recently declared, youth mental health is the crisis of our time. I never dreamed 30 years ago, in beginning this work, that would ever be a statement that could be true, and that we'd see the growing evidence we've seen. And, our belief that we could point the finger at the global pandemic as the cause, or technology as the cause, and they certainly were significant factors. There is no question in anyone's mind about that. But the reality being, we're on the other side of the pandemic, and we've not course corrected in many ways. And so what's there to learn? What's there to learn? And so, if I were to think more deeply about the great question that you're asking, I think one of the other extremes we've seen, and I want to be very careful in what I'm about to say, because I'm not saying this in a negative way, but, think about the common conversation around gentle parenting, where I think there are some great tenets to what was intended to be a part of that, let's call it a movement. That is another place where I think we've done a lot of extremes and swinging in extremes, that I think, if we had just been thinking about how could I gentle my tone or gentle my approach, I think there's a lot of great wisdom within that. My concern is we've also within that gentled our boundaries and gentled our expectations and gentled consequences. So many of the things that you and I both know are foundational to development. We talk so much in our work about how boundaries create security, and a lack of boundaries creates insecurity.
Yes.
And I think in terms of capability, when we allow kids to be the worst version of themselves, they can start to believe that's what's most true, as opposed to when we have expectations in place and consequences that are part of the learning, they get to rise to the evidence of who God made them to be. They get to rise to the better version of themselves. And so I'm concerned it's been one more place where we've done a lot of, we call them swings and extremes, that have not been helpful along the way.
And I see that too. I had a feeling that's the parenting style you were going to go to. And I have a lot of grace for that. I think, to your point, what we end up doing is, I say it this way, kind of what you were saying in the beginning there, is that we tend to parent the way our parents parented us, or we do it the exact opposite way because we don't like the way they parented us, but we do both without even thinking about why. They just become automatic, right?
Yes.
And so when we go to those extremes, for me personally, I think my heart is for parents in so many cases, because even you talked about the Surgeon General with youth mental health crisis. Surgeon General also, a year and a half ago, put out an advisory on the mental health and well-being of parents,
Indeed.
and the stress of parenting.
Yeah.
And again, we could look at all the different factors, but whenever, I know for me, I am less stressed when my kids, I was the overly helicopter, probably in the beginning, like just lenient, probably towards gentle parenting, to be very honest with you. In the beginning, I was all about emotional safety. We know the research on emotional safety, all that thing. But emotional safety includes boundaries.
Yes.
And it includes the ability to, as Jesus did, lead in grace, but then follow in truth. And, now I have noticed over the last, 14 years of being a parent that I am less stressed when I'm watching my children. Well, first of all, when my children are helping do things in the house, when they are taking care of chickens, when they're unloading the dishwasher, when they see that, hey, company's coming over and the house needs to be picked up. So they're the ones taking the initiative to do it, versus me having to tell them over and over, or me, oh, it's okay. And so much of them not seeing it is, in the beginning, me not seeing that they were capable enough, or that it was a waste. I could do it faster if I just did it myself. And so it puts more burden on me as a parent over time. And I think we've gotten there, and especially in an individualistic culture where maybe we are living where our parents aren't. And so we don't have as much support. And now all of a sudden it adds more burden. You see why we are in the predicament we're in many ways.
Yes, absolutely. And I think within all that, we have put a strong emphasis. This is back to your great original question too. Sissy and I have just seen this growing emphasis over the last decade in particular, that we are deeply committed to our kids' happiness and their confidence. Like, we've given so much attention to those two things. And we talk in the Capable book about how confidence for kids is birthed out of competence. And developing competence means I have to do hard things. I have to do a lot of hard things for a long time. We're a culture that I think is deeply committed to hacks.
Oh,
and there are no hacks for competence. There are no shortcuts for building competence. And so that's one category. The other is happiness. And, what we know to be true is that happiness is temporary and it's transient. It comes and it goes. If I were to pick a day from the past week, I'll go to Tuesday. I felt really happy having breakfast. I had a great breakfast that morning. It lasted about 30 minutes. I remember feeling really happy that evening when I was sitting in the floor of our den, petting our dog and having this great conversation with my wife. And that lasted about 45 minutes. The rest of the day, I was just doing the normal stuff of life. I was at work. I was returning emails. I was running errands. I wasn't unhappy, but I didn't experience this overwhelming amount of happiness. And my guess would be that ratio is probably true for a lot of people listening right now. So
yeah.
If I'm placing the highest emphasis on happiness and wanting my kids to feel happy as much and as often as possible, I'm not setting them up well for adulthood. And what we're seeing that translate to with kids and adolescents, teenagers in particular, is when they don't experience an overwhelming amount of happiness, they start to ask two questions. One is, what's wrong with me? What am I doing wrong? Or what's wrong with my life? And then we factor in the animal of social media, and I could just show up on Instagram and see what looks like a world full of people who are experiencing overwhelming happiness in that little
box
screenshot. Yeah, that highlight reel of life right there that, we all know has been highly curated and is maybe catching their 30 minutes of the day as well, but looks like the full experience. And so we challenge parents. One of the challenges or invitations within this book is, let's take the emphasis off that. Like, let's celebrate every one of us when we have moments of happiness, and let's, to your great wisdom, look back at what we have been called to as people of God. There's just nowhere in Scripture that I found that you're blessed when you're feeling an overwhelming amount of happiness. In fact, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. Yep.
And how could we live into the wisdom of Romans 5 and Romans 8 and John 16 and the reminders to kids that We've been given a very clear blueprint that suffering gives way to perseverance, perseverance to character, and character to hope. And I wish there were a vitamin or a gummy we could give our kids on a Wednesday night and they'd wake up Thursday morning with a lot of hope. But the
Yep.
reality
Yep.
is none of us are exempt from that blueprint,
That's
and
right.
that it always begins at the place of struggle where all these good things are built.
Yeah.
Resourcefulness, resilience, capability, all the good stuff we know comes from struggle. I often ask parents in my office, like, think about the times in your own life when you would say you grew the most. The answer, the highest percentage of the time, almost 100% of the time, is always in the harder seasons. It's what's true. It's what we've been promised in Scripture. But we're not left alone in that. Like, take heart. In this world, you're going to have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world.
And that's, to your point, I think it's really important. So I'm going to go to God in this particular instance because, yeah, biblically, suffering is the way to character. It's the way to that resourcefulness and building. And I see a lot of men today, dads who, and I'm seeing this in my 13-year-old. So, my son will come to me and he'll say, Dad, I feel like I'm having trouble hearing the voice of God. What's wrong with me? And I see this in a lot of dads then too. And then how we shepherd our kids into, well, how do you hear the voice of God? And, I hear other people telling me that they hear the voice of God, but I'm not hearing the voice of God. So what's wrong with me? And I use this analogy, and I think it's exactly what the wisdom you're speaking to is, it's kind of like our relationship with God is kind of like marriage. It's kind of like your day, your 45 minutes with your wife. It's a lot of mundane with some awesome moments sprinkled in.
There it is.
And it's like, so you're not going to necessarily have these awesome mountaintop experiences with God every single day.
Yes.
It's about relationship and just staying the course and showing up. And it's not always and so, yeah, I'd love for you to speak to that too, in terms of the confidence piece. You're talking about competence leading to confidence, not happiness leading to confidence.
Yes.
What are your suggestions? How are we building that competence so that they're confident both in who they are, what they bring, but also in their relationships?
Yes. Oh, I think it's an incredibly important question. And I wish there were a better, different, easier answer I could give to parents, but it's simply that truth that competence is built in the everyday moments of figuring out I can do hard things, of figuring out I'm capable of struggle. I'm built for it. And God is with me in it. All of what we just described as we think about Romans 5:8 and John 16. And the other thing I would say to your great question is this. We talk in the book about how what we have seen a lot, and I'd be curious if this feels true for you and your work, that when we encounter kids whose parents have devoted a lot of time and energy to building confidence without competence, what we often see is two things that aren't helpful. One is kids who have an inflated sense of self, and kids who cannot receive feedback well. So I have lost count with the hundreds of stories I've heard from parents of where they see evidence of both. I had a dad who said to me recently, he said, David, my 4th grade son talks all the time about wanting to play in the NFL, but he won't even try out for flag football. And when we played basketball last season, he said, a good friend of mine coached, and I would observe him giving feedback to my son, both at practice and at games. And I noticed how often my son looked down or looked away and then would misinterpret the challenge that was given. He's like, I know this man. I trust this man. He said, I've even stood in earshot to hear exactly what he heard, what he said to my son, and how my son would distort that because it was challenge. It wasn't praise. It wasn't affirmation. It's like he didn't know what to do when he didn't just receive this messaging around, you're so great. You're doing so great. It's like, these are the things I want you to work on.
Yeah.
You had a great game and here's some things to practice this next week. And it's like he could work with the first half of that sentence. He could not work with the last half. So I think it's disadvantaging in that way. And I love that you spoke to within that question all of how I think that impacts relationship, because I'm deeply concerned about this other swing of messaging to kids and adolescents and adults throughout their lives, this sense of if the relationship doesn't serve you well, I think about how often that phrase is used. If it doesn't make you happy, then exit out. Thank
Man.
goodness my wife never absorbed that message.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of our marriage probably not making her happy. In fact, maybe even making her really frustrated in a lot of moments when I'm the lowest version of myself.
Yeah.
And that her commitment, her vow to me and my vow to her was so much more deeper. In fact, it didn't even involve a vow of commit yourself to making this person happy every day. That wasn't in the vows we made each other. It was till death do you part. Like, stay in the struggle. Be with this person however God writes your story.
Yeah, what you were saying, there's a couple different thoughts that I have to it. Christy just this morning was giving me feedback, and it was a moment where it's a conversation we have had multiple times through the years. And in the past, I didn't do as well receiving the feedback, and I would get defensive. And because I didn't feel like she was seeing my point of view, I didn't feel like we were, and so now this morning, I'm much more aware than I was 16 years ago when we first got married, and we've had these conversations, and there's still some touch and go, but it's like we're receiving feedback better from each other. We're 16 years into this thing, learning how to receive feedback. And I'll tell you, it doesn't feel good. But as you know, when you're 16 years into a relationship or longer, and you've worked through those things, I can honestly say, like, we have grown so deeply and we love each other so much more, even in those hard moments, because we've gone through those hard moments. And when we're robbing our kids of that, when we're not engaging feedback, when we're not, and my fear is, what we're doing is we're parenting for just our kids. It's like, I want to make my kids happy. But when you start to think about, and I started to really think about, I want to raise my kids in light of my great grandkids. So when you look at generational wealth, regardless of what you feel about these families, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Kennedys, they have passed generational wealth from generation to generation to generation. And typically we see that usually stops by about the third generation that wealth is squandered. Well, when you read their biographies, you begin to understand this family paths of, how they pass inheritance from one generation to the other, but they equip them to be able to do that.
Yes.
And it's the same thing for us, I think, with our faith heritage, with our emotional and spiritual maturity, that we are passing that so well that I'm training my children to raise their children who will then train. And I just think that we're missing that component. So going back to what you were saying about the two things, they can't receive feedback and they have an overinflated view of self. I mean, there's a I don't know if you've read this, and maybe you guys you may even use this, but The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. So it's a business book.
I haven't read it.
But it's all about safety in the workplace. And there's a phrase that they use that I have taken to our parenting. And it's a 19-word phrase that really identifies that support challenge really well. And it's this: I'm giving you this feedback because I have high expectations of you and I know you can meet them.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And they found in their research data that statement is the most effective statement for getting outcome in employees.
That's extraordinary.
And so that to this whole idea of capable and what you're speaking of, we're afraid of our kids failing. And so I would love for you to identify, you mentioned earlier about the acronym FAIL in the book, and give parents some encouragement that it's okay to do that. Like, how do we do this? What are ways that we can challenge our children without feeling like we're quote unquote failing them?
Yes. I would say this: first step in my mind would be talk about that acronym. In fact, don't just talk about it. I want to encourage parents listening, put that on a note card on the refrigerator, somewhere visible that you can point to, and allow that to become a part of how you narrate your experience as a family. When you sit around the dinner table, that everybody talks about a fail moment in the week. Like that becomes a regular part of your vocabulary as a family. One that feels of such importance in this age of anxiety because so many anxious kids are perfectionistic. They don't give themselves the opportunity to fail. They don't know how to laugh at themselves. They don't understand that's a part of learning. So I think that
So good.
becoming a central part of how you talk together as a family feels of such importance.
I need to implement that immediately.
It's so important. And I think it's such an easy step we can take in a great direction that is part of building capable. And secondly, I want to go back to something you shared that I love. I was thinking about that story I shared about the fourth grade boy struggling to take feedback from a trusted, safe coach as a fourth grader, and then travel down the road of development to the moment you described, which is every married person's experience if you're in a healthy relationship, that we can give feedback, that we can build awareness. And what I want to invite parents to consider is that if I don't allow those moments on the front side, it is impossible that they would know how to do that well. We talk all throughout the book about these skills. We have five strengths, 5 skills, and 5 strategies that are kind of the nuts and bolts of building capable. And if we're not, we talk about learning and practicing, and equal parts of both. It's not enough that I just learn one of these skills. I've got to practice it, which is where the competence is built. I'm just not prepared for the moments of life when I need it the most, which is the very context you just described. I was having a conversation at breakfast this morning. My oldest daughter is home, and she finished grad school. She is an educator like her mom, and she was telling me that she will be doing conferences with all of her students' families kind of in the beginning stretch of school. And I was asking her about how that goes down. And one of her practices is inviting kids to be a part of those conferences where the two of them work through the feedback that they want to give to parents. And the kid is the primary communicator of that feedback. And they're going to talk about their strengths, and they're going to talk about their struggles, and they're going to talk about their goals for the semester. And all of the opportunity that I think exists in what is a 30-minute conference would be my guess. That is the beautiful learning and practice. That is the foundational ingredients of competence. That is the practice of building awareness and receiving feedback and figuring out how could I turn that feedback into manageable, practical, doable goals. I'm like, sweetie, you have no idea what you are offering these kids in that 30-minute opportunity. Even, I'd go a step further and say, even the practice of sitting with family members and talking about what could be some harder things.
Yep.
All of what comes from that 30-minute experience that I just would invite parents in sharing that story. Be thinking about all the opportunities that we can allow kids to learn and practice these things, and be thinking about, again, right back to if my target is happiness, I don't want my kids to get feedback. I don't want them to receive constructive criticism. I don't want to sit in the room with their teacher and hear about how they're struggling. So if that's the target, that is inevitably going to stand in the way. And even as we think about it in the context of anxiety, Sissy and I talk a lot about how the research has consistently communicated that the 2 default parenting patterns when it comes to anxiety in kids are escape and avoidance. I see you struggling in some context, and I want to extract you from it.
Well,
And to everything we're saying, the struggle parts are where the good growth happens. So if I'm constantly extracting you from those opportunities, I'm just robbing you of the good opportunities for the good growth.
wow. I see this in adulthood too, David. You talked about, I'd be curious of your thoughts on this. And because I think that, and part of where I'm going with this is, where are we heading, as a society? And I think we as parents hold the keys in many cases to where we are heading, because how the next generation is going to turn out is how we're raising our children. And, I see a lot of, cutting off, even in adulthood, cutting off parents. I can't tell you the number. It's increasing all the time. The number of quote unquote grandparents that I'm meeting with who say that their their kids have cut them off because they
Yes.
entered therapy and they learned that there were some things that they didn't like about how they parented them, and they just and it's like we've done this as a society where we've cut ourselves off from anything. It's not just in kids, that we as adults are taking on this sense of, well, if it doesn't feel good, I'm just going to get it out of my life
Yes.
altogether. And we are avoiding it as a society.
Yes.
And so I think it, to your point, and I love that you guys are doing this, like, because I think as parents, we are the ones who have the ability to shift society in these ways. I think of Paul writing, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our sorrows so that we can comfort others. And we just stay stuck in this whole idea of comfort us in our sorrows. Just comfort me in my sorrows. We miss the so that. Like, there's a purpose. There's a purpose in the pain. There's a purpose in the challenge. And somewhere along the way, we have missed that. And
Yes.
and so it's fascinating to me. Sorry, I'm thinking more adult societal here rather than for the parent individually. So if you're a parent listening to this, I apologize. But I think as a parent, it calls us to a higher standard.
Yes, it does.
To what it is. Like, it's a great high calling that we get to shepherd our children
Yes.
for kingdom purposes.
Yes.
And
and
yeah,
can I add a thought to your
please
wisdom?
do. Please do. Oh,
Where I think it applies directly to kids. Josh, I can't tell you how concerned I am with you about this idea of family estrangement and how it's running like wildfire through our world. And one of the things Sissy and I talk about in the book as well is this idea of what we call language inflation that has been a part of what we've seen in terms of a
interesting.
movement in the world. And, this idea that we rarely sit with adolescents anymore who would say, I feel sad about anything. They jump straight to, I feel depressed. Now, statistically, more adolescents are meeting the criteria for what we understand to be true depression, and a high percentage of those who are using that word don't. And I think about how often in our world we use the word toxic. I did an assessment with a little 6-year-old girl, and when families come for their first appointment with Daystar, we take kids on a tour and they get a snack at the house and they meet some of our therapy dogs, and then we sit down to talk a little bit about why they're there. And I, in conversation with this 6-year-old girl, asked her, tell me a little bit more about what you and your mom and dad talked about before you came today. And she said, without hesitation, I have a lot of toxic relationships. 6 years old. Now, I had to fight laughing. It was so funny coming out of her mouth, but I also felt incredibly sad. And my next thought was, you shouldn't even know that word at 6.
Yep.
And I feel certain you don't know what it means. And,
Yep.
I'm here to report, after spending time with her and her parents, she did not have any toxic relationships in her life. She had some difficult ones, as all 6-year-olds will, and she was over-labeling the experience, which I think we are doing at all ages. And it bridging the space between frustration in relationship and this is toxic and I need to cut it off.
Yeah.
And I'm deeply concerned. And one of the challenges, I've given a number of parents in my office who've made the very decision you described a few minutes ago. I'm going to cut my parents off because they didn't fill in the blank, is that reminder that your kids are sitting front row and watching this generational impact and making decisions, and it could be the exact same decision they make around disappointment with you. Now, please hear me say loud and clear, I understand there are unique circumstances where for some period of time that may be warranted. I'm not at all recommending we bypass those.
Absolutely.
But what I want people to hear in terms of this idea of language inflation is that's the smaller percentage of the time.
Yeah.
And I'm deeply concerned we're applying that to the larger percentage of the time. And if we connect it back to this happiness thing, to your wisdom, it's like any relationship that doesn't serve me, any relationship that doesn't make me feel happy, any relationship that doesn't accommodate a lot of my needs, however we want to frame or phrase it, then I'm going to cut that out.
Yeah.
And I simply want to remind parents, I love the words of Robert Fulghum, who once said, don't worry that kids are never listening. Worry that they are always watching.
Oh, that's a statement. Wow.
Yes. And that our children are watching. They're watching the decisions we're making with our parents. They're watching our interaction with our parents. They're watching our interaction with our adult siblings, and they're learning in all moments. They're observing and absorbing all of those relational exchanges taking place and filing those away. So we couldn't pay enough attention to that as we think about the targets we're moving toward.
So, wow, what a statement that is. I'm going to repeat it so I remember it. Don't worry that your kids are not listening, but worry that they're always watching.
Yes.
Whew.
Here's an invitation.
Wow. We could talk for hours, and I want to respect your time. I highly encourage you all, go get this book, Capable, by David Thomas and Sissy Goff. Any of their resources, we're going to have it in the show notes today. Check out raisingboysandgirls.com. All of their work is just phenomenal. And you may have even seen them locally. You guys have been speaking a lot. You guys have had a busy year. So
we have had a busy year.
Yeah.
And can I say right back in response to that generous invitation, I want folks who are listening to keep listening and exploring every resource you and your delightful wife are putting out in the world, because you are two voices that we trust and respect. And it is a joy anytime our paths intersect, friend.
Well,
it is a joy to get to spend time with you.
Well, that feeling is incredibly mutual, and we love you guys. I do want to leave you with the final word. What is just kind of your one last, maybe most useful thought for a parent, last parting word, encouragement? What would you share as you've written Capable? You've been speaking on this. You meet with children and parents day in and day out. If you can summarize all your findings into one encouragement or useful takeaway, what would that be?
Would you allow me to give one encouragement and one takeaway?
Please
Could I do both?
I would love it.
Okay. My encouragement would be to parents, and I say this from the perspective of doing this work for 3 decades. Play the long game. Play the long game. If you are in a particular moment right now that feels hard in parenting, remind yourself that you are seeing a glimpse of all of the story God is writing in the life of your child.
So good.
Not the full picture. And play the long game. And I would say a takeaway is we even think about how can we put this into practice right now, whatever age your child may be. If you're listening and you have a 2-year-old, if you have a 22-year-old, Sissy and I love inviting parents to think about what are 2 things that you are currently doing that your kids could do for themselves. And then think about what are 2 things that they could almost do that you're currently doing for them. And then figure out how to take some baby steps backwards from those places. You don't have to go cold turkey, but just start moving the other direction, allowing for more opportunity to build capability, independence, resourcefulness, resilience, even knowing, to the very conversation we've just shared, that might involve some moaning and groaning, might be some grumbling and complaining, I might witness some lack of happiness, and the reminder that all the good growth happens in those places. So you don't need to pick 100 things. You don't even need to pick 10 things. Just pick 2. Just pick 2 right now. If you have littles, as soon as kids can walk, they can pick up toys. They can help unload the lower level of the dishwasher. Elementary age kids can make their own lunch. High school kids can do their own laundry. So be thinking in the everyday of things you're doing that could be doing for themselves, and move in that direction.
So good. Man, I love it. I'm so grateful for you, David. And for those of you who don't, David's helped us with our own kiddos so many times through the years, and just the wisdom and the practical takeaways have always been such a blessing to our family. I have a few useful takeaways for myself from this episode that I can't wait to implement with my family. So I just encourage you, as you're listening today, just imagine, what is that one most useful takeaway that you know that the Spirit of God is speaking to your heart to say, this is what I need to do with my children? Or maybe it's with each individual child. There might be something different. What is that useful takeaway? And until next week, keep in mind that the greatest red carpet you'll walk is through your front door.